What if the Switch 2 never happened? But instead, we got that long-rumored Switch Pro. Where would we be right now, and what would have happened with Nintendo? Would there be as much hate or grifting as there is right now? Would people be upset as they are with Switch 2's output? Or would everybody be happy, and would things still be going as smoothly as they were with the Switch 1's launch? To find out, let's go back 9 years ago to 2017, the launch of the Nintendo Switch 1. The Switch 1 launched with critical success. 2017 was looked at by a lot of people, even myself, as one of the greatest video game years ever, and especially for Nintendo. They had banger after banger, launching with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Splatoon 2 in the summer, and Mario Odyssey in the winter. There were of course your occasional naysayers, but Nintendo fans were eating so good. But just 2 years later, Nintendo had a new model up their sleeves. Yep, the Nintendo Switch Lite. This would be a cheaper, smaller, pocket version of the original Nintendo Switch, one that didn't come with a dock and you couldn't output to your TV. It was just a Switch on the go, and primarily only on the go. It was a mobile console. This wasn't a crazy big release, like it didn't come with its own new batch of games or anything like that, and it was just a cheaper version of the Switch, meant to simply just be an alternate. But ever since the launch of the Switch Lite, it also introduced something else in the rumor mill, a Switch Pro. Everyone, and I mean everyone, myself included, was talking about this inevitable Switch Pro, and all the rumors and information coming out about the thing seemed to be pretty legit. There were factories making chips for the thing and new screens being shipped in. It looked very, very well like Nintendo was gearing up for a stronger version of the original Nintendo Switch, because let's face it, the original Switch wasn't that strong. So for years we would talk about this thing being true, and it all started right after the Switch 2, but the main problem was 2020, which was quarantine, and it actually affected the industry pretty significantly. And to this day, the rumor still has it that Nintendo just straight up scrapped its mid-generation hardware refresh due to the global microchip shortages that we were having. This would force Nintendo's hand and shift their plans entirely. Their new generation refresh that they would have in probably a couple years after Switch Lite was now pushed to a completely new project of the Switch 2, a sequel to the original Switch that wouldn't release until 2025. Now, as that long wait happened for the next 5 years, tons of information about this inevitable Switch 2 was starting to drop. We were getting leaked patents, specs, and straight up images of the console well before it was officially revealed by Nintendo, and once it was, it looked exactly the way we thought it would. It looks like a Switch, but slightly bigger and a little better. And even to this day, a lot of people still think the Switch 2 feels just like a Switch Pro would. Just a slightly more powerful version of Switch 1, which that's all people really wanted. But what if instead of waiting for a Switch sequel in 2025, we instead get that mid-generation power-up with a Switch Pro years earlier? Let's jump back 3 years before the Switch 2 would come out in 2023, just 4 years after the Lite and 6 years after the original base model. This was looked at as, besides 2017, one of Nintendo's best years they had on Nintendo Switch 1 entirely. I mean, they had a huge Tears of the Kingdom release, which for a lot of people was on the same hype scale as Breath of the Wild was, not to mention finally seeing what Pikmin 4 was after all these years of waiting and promises, and a new fresh rebrand for 2D Mario, finally moving out of the new moniker. This would have been a pretty massive lineup for a year of a new console, which could have very well happened. What if the Switch Pro launched in 2023 to coincide with the release of Tears of the Kingdom, the same way Switch 1 did with Breath of the Wild? This isn't a Switch Lite situation. This isn't just going to be an alternative console. The Switch Pro would be superior in every way, and even needed to play some future games. And starting with the likes of Tears of the Kingdom, Mario Wonder, and Pikmin 4, this would undoubtedly be a massive lineup for them. What's also interesting about this is Tears of the Kingdom and also Mario Wonder both got Switch 2 upgrades to look better and to have more content. And according to super reliable leaker Nin10doland, he's even alluded to a Pikmin 4 Switch 2 edition coming sometime this year, perhaps even this summer. So imagine a world where Switch Pro comes out and we already, off the bat, get better versions of Tears of the Kingdom, Pikmin 4, and even Mario Wonder to play on our Switch Pro. But it's not necessary. You can still play these games on Switch 1, but they're not going to run anywhere near as better as they would on the Switch Pro. price was also going to be a major factor. The Switch 1 was $300 US. The Switch Lite reasonably brought the price down $100. And we know years later that the Switch 2 would be $450, and thanks to price hikes and the state of the economy, this fall it would be moving up even higher to $500. But what if the Switch Pro avoided all this? I mean, most people, and the rumors included, was predicting the new Switch Pro to be only around $350 to $400 max. So with this, if there's any future price hikes, you'd be sitting at the same price you'd pay today for a Switch 2. Of course, there's no surefire way of telling if that's exactly how the prices would have worked. It could have just been the same price of the Switch 2 off the bat at $450, but I think the significance here isn't the price, it's the release of this console being 2 years earlier and the software that came out with it. Because now the following year of 2024 could also have bangers as well, because it can now be exactly what we got the first year of Switch 2. From every developer interview that we heard from pretty much every Switch 2 game in 2025, it told a similar story of how each of these games were being planned for Switch 1, and the only reason it took so long for them to come out is because they were waiting for the stronger hardware of the Switch 2. This means a year that was originally just kind of a send-off year for the Switch 1 can now be a massive start year for Switch Pro, and where they start to transition over to Switch Pro exclusive games with Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Kirby Air Riders, and everything else that came out in 2025 for Switch 2. One of the biggest complaints right now is that the Switch 2 doesn't feel all that big of a jump in generations, because it really kind of feels like a Switch Pro, which is exactly what people wanted, but it's marketed as a brand new Switch, a brand new console, a brand new generation experience. I truly believe if we never had the 2020 quarantine, which led to a chip shortage, and the Switch 2 came out earlier as the Switch Pro, things would be a lot different right now. I think fans would have no problem with what's releasing. There wouldn't be a major need for a look at the next Zelda, 3D Mario, or really any major franchise right now. We'd be just continuing through the Switch era. And with everything being moved up, right now we could be in a completely different state. Perhaps Nintendo's gearing up for a 3D Mario by 2026 at this point, or the next Super Smash Bros. Has already been revealed. Maybe Pokemon Wind and Waves would be coming out this year instead of 2027. I'll take it slow on that one, this game needs to cook regardless. But if that happened, we could be sitting in a completely different situation right now, which means perhaps in 2027 or 2028, we could be gearing up for our next generation hardware. I'll be honest with you, I have no clue what to even expect from the future of Nintendo hardware. Where do they go from the Switch? It's been such a massive, successful hybrid home and portable console thing. How do you move away from that? Sure, you can just continue making Switches, making it a new subset of consoles that Nintendo goes with, or you can go back to basics and make a basic home console that's just super powerful now. Perhaps this is where Nintendo introduced a true Switch 2, something that felt like a completely new jump in a generation. But Nintendo would have to have games that launched with this new console, and with them releasing a new Mario Kart on the Switch Pro, a new 3D Donkey Kong, potentially even a new 3D Mario, they really wouldn't have much ready unless the next Zelda is getting near completion. So perhaps they still would have held off on 3D Mario, even for the Switch Pro, just to launch with this new console. But it's definitely interesting to think about, because we always talk about how it's almost impossible for Nintendo to outdo what they did in 2017. But could you imagine if we got a new piece of hardware in 2028, and with that new hardware we got a new 3D Zelda and 3D Mario again, but this time with a brand new generation of Pokemon with Wind and Waves as well? Now all this stuff can still happen with Switch 2 today, but it's just interesting to think about how things would have been slightly different if the Switch Pro actually would have came out years earlier. But regardless, the Switch 2 is a huge success right now. I mean, we've gotten a new game every single month. Even if it's just a Switch 2 edition of an older game, a port, a remake, or a new title, or maybe just a spin-off, we've gotten something to play every month. And I don't see any sign of that slowing down anytime soon. We have games slated all the way throughout the summer. So I think it's safe to say that on paper, Switch 2 is doing really well. I just think with the Switch 2 being labeled as the Switch 2, a lot of people expected a little bit more out of a new generation of a console. With the Switch Pro, you might be able to get away with little Switch 2 editions, or which would be Switch Pro editions, and smaller spin-off titles releasing. But with this being called and labeled as a Switch 2, a lot of people are looking for the next big thing. A new 2D Yoshi game or a new Mario Tennis is inevitable and nothing super exciting. And a couple heavy hitters that we have gotten, like Mario Kart World, didn't resonate with every player. But I truly do believe as we go through the rest of this year, we're going to truly start to see some of those titles that make the Switch 2 worth it. Before no time, we'll see those inevitable 3D Zeldas, Marios, Animal Crossings, Smash Brothers, the stuff that we all buy in for a new console for in the first place. But it's still just fun times to speculate what could have happened with a Switch Pro. But who knows, maybe in a couple years we'll get some Switch 2 Pro rumors. Oh, please no.